That was Lorraine Mulvey speaking to us a little bit earlier on News Talk Lunchtime. Even listening back to that interview now, I mean, she was so frank, she was so eloquent and so brave, and gave such a remarkable insight into the struggle that victims have, long before they even talk to anyone about what went on, never mind going to the Gardaí and starting a criminal process. We're joined on the line by Emily Logan, the Ombudsman for Children. Emily Logan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Johnson.
For someone like Lorraine to speak out, as I said, just to get through to even one person listening, to come forward and start to talk about first of all, she was incredibly brave for what she has done, and hopefully good can come out of what was a terrible situation for her and her family.
Incredibly brave, but also you can hear that Lorraine's motivation is about her concerns, and I was very, very struck in her own time of difficulty that she's actually thinking about other people and other victims and encouraging them by waiving her own right to anonymity. So I think it's very, very remarkable, and also very, very difficult for her. You could hear the depth of emotion when she spoke about the support from her sister Sinead and how much that meant to her. So I think they've been incredible. She's incredible herself, and it's fantastic to hear that she was believed straight away, because for children, as Ombudsman for Children, my focus is on children. One of the barriers to disclosing sexual abuse is actually the notion that they might not be believed, or the concern that if they tell what's going on, that somebody might not believe them.
I mean, she made reference to something that struck a chord with me, because we've all been children and we've all sat in a classroom, and the most important thing in a classroom should be what time your lunch break is at, or whatever you're looking forward to in the afternoon. She sat in the classroom looking to try and find someone else who'd been through the same ordeal, because she didn't want to be alone. I mean, that was such an awful thing for a child to have to live with.
And hoping that somebody would notice that something had happened. In fact, what it does do is it really, really emphasises the fact that Lorraine has been so courageous, emphasises the reality for children in Ireland in terms of sexual abuse, that children are much more likely to be abused by an adult who's known to them. Now, we do know in a report published as far back as 2002, it's the Sexual Abuse and Violence Report in Ireland, that children by and large are abused by people who are known to them. Girls, it's 24% for family members, and for boys it's 14%. But the average is 80% of children who are abused by somebody who's either within their family or somebody who's known to them, a family member, a friend, acquaintance, a neighbour, somebody that is close to the family. And that's something that we should be much more alert to. And while I know there has been justifiably public anger about clerical sexual abuse, that report also reminded us that in fact clerical sexual abuse represents a very, very small figure of just about 3.2% for all of the children that are abused. And I suppose it's beholden on all of us to accurately report and respond to familial abuse, because it's an area that people are very uncomfortable about. You can hear for Lorraine the implications for somebody who's been abused in the context of a family is, will you lose your family? Will you lose your relationships with your family? And it's not just about the individual, but it's very much a family issue, and how difficult that is to deal with.
And is there a concern that, well, it is massively underreported because of that reason, because of a lot of it is so much familial abuse, that it isn't something that we see every day in the courts, because for all the reasons that Lorraine outlined, there's a reluctance to come forward and report it. And even when you get into a courtroom, there's no guarantee you're ever going to get a conviction against the perpetrator. So is this an unspoken problem in our society, that this is going on, and that these children, particularly those in situations where they're abused by by people in their family and not by strangers, that really the society has in many ways let them down because we haven't created a forum for them to talk about this?
I think that's right. I think we're much more comfortable. I suppose psychologically we're much more comfortable with the notion of the old-fashioned idea of stranger danger, where we talk about things like the vetting legislation, and there's lots of attention on the vetting legislation. But people like this, Lorraine's father would never appear on a pulse system in Phoenix Park HQ.
Well, he was an army sergeant. He was a respected army sergeant for all we know.
Yes, but the point I'm making is that there are many people who do not behave appropriately towards children, and vetting will only find the people who have a criminal record. So I suppose that the point I'm trying to make is, as you said yourself, Jonathan, it is underreported. It's much more difficult for people in the context of familial abuse to say it, because the ramifications are so great and so distressing for them. And Lorraine herself described about being numb or just not being able to express how she feels toward her father. And that's hugely complex emotionally and psychologically for people.
What can people do to watch out for the warning signs? Because sometimes they're subtle, sometimes they're more obvious. Lorraine spoke at length about how she had been acting out in school and that her life obviously had been very badly affected by this. But is there anything that you can do as a parent or a family friend or whatever?
I think there are two key points there that Lorraine herself raised. One was about the community response or the cultural response to children and listening to children and having a more open culture where we discuss things. And teachers, certainly our experience in the office is that teachers are very high on the list of advocates for children, and they are people who notice changes in children's behaviours, whether that's extremes of behaviour, whether a child is withdrawn or acting out. Teachers have been very critical before you ever get to a point of therapeutic intervention. But as a community, we need to develop a better culture of just generally listening to children. In terms of the state, of course, then the state need to have robust systems of protection, which are really important, and that's something our own office has been working on for quite some time. And then
in the wider context, Emily, I mean, there have been other cases recently of horrific child abuse that was familial abuse that were before the courts as well. I mean, we didn't hear from those victims apart from what we heard in court. But a lot of the time, there are people who would have suspicions or who would be curious as to how children are being treated in a family home, and they just don't report it because they feel it's not their place. Do we need, as a society, to get to the point whereby it isn't? It is your responsibility as a human being towards another human being to at least report something or to report a suspicion?
I think that's right in terms of our individual responsibility. I think it's also important to remind people that I know while I'm an independent institution as Ombudsman for Children, I don't work for the government, but we do know that the government is working on some very strong legislation specifically in the area of child protection, and it's very good to see that level of activity around legislation. And some of that legislation will place an obligation on individuals in the community that if they have a concern, a valid concern of child abuse, that is reported. It places responsibility on us to report, and I think that is important.
And what about the children's referendum as well? Because that's been kicked to touch for many years. Do you think if we had a discussion around that, perhaps children's rights and the issue of child safety would be put to the fore in everyone's mind before they went and voted in that?
Well, I think in the Constitution, I mean, it's probably important to say that I don't think any piece of legislation is going to stop. Sadly, it's not going to stop the sad reality that children will continue to be abused no matter what legislation is introduced. But what I do think about the Constitution, and including principles of considering children and having to listen to children, would be a starting point in terms of changing our cultural attitude more generally towards